So last night at the time of this recording, I was talking to YouTube chat during one of my Smash streams, and we were talking about characters that we think are likely to find their way into Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl. So I thought I would take the time today to make sort of a tier list of the characters I think have a chance of getting in and how likely each one of them are. So let's get right into it. Alright, so I apologize for all of these ads. I don't have ad block and I didn't care enough to install it. But regardless, let's start off with a couple characters that I think have a pretty good chance of making it into the game, and then some that I think that probably don't have a good chance of making it in. This isn't all exhaustive of all of the Nickelodeon shows that have come out. These are just the ones that I think base have a chance of getting into the game. But I'm going to rate them just on my own opinion. So let's start off with two characters that are practically confirmed for the game, but haven't been shown in the trailer. That's Aang and Korra. Now, a couple months ago, there was a leak, I believe on Reddit, for the box art of the game where Korra and Aang are both on there fighting. I don't know how reliable this leak is, because we already know that Avatar: The Last Airbender is going to have some representation because the Western Air Temple is a stage already in the game that we saw in the trailer. However, the cover art, box art for the game where these two were featured had a different name. It was like Nickelodeon Super Brawl or Superstars or something like that. So maybe they just changed the name of the game later on. But I do think these two characters are going to get in because arguably within the past, 10 years, these are the most popular shows from Nickelodeon. But so these ones are pretty highly likely to be in. If not, then just someone from the universe. But Aang, I'm pretty sure, is confirmed already. Next up, we have Back at the Barnyard. Now, I'm sort of lumping Back at the Barnyard with Penguins of Madagascar, Attacking the Power of Juju, and some of those other shows that existed on Nickelodeon. I don't think they have a very good chance, specifically for the fact that they aren't Nickelodeon originals. I feel this game is going to try to focus mostly on Nickelodeon originals, unless it's going to be DLC. Which we don't know anything about DLC yet. But I think these all have the same low chance of getting in just because they are Nickelodeon shows, but they're not Nickelodeon originals. So I think it's fairly unlikely that, Back at the Barnyard, Penguins of Madagascar, Attacking the Power of Juju, I think it's fairly unlikely that they'll get into the game. Next up, Cat Dog. Some of the younger fans may not recognize this character, but Cat Dog was a show that ran years and years ago. It's a cat and a dog fused together, like, one's on the other end of each other, and they always banter back and forth. They're not necessarily fighters, but I think they could translate very well into fighters. You could switch between which one takes the grunt, like, dog deals the most damage, but cat is quicker or more nimble. Some mechanic like that they could implement, and I think they would translate fairly well and would be pretty fun and pretty funny in the game. They could have quips back and forth and some funny taunts or anything to that degree. And then next up we have Manny Rivera, or El Tigre. This was a show that ran a while back, probably around the same time as Avatar: The Last Airbender. But Manny Rivera essentially transforms into El Tigre, which is his superhero form, and he is actually a fighter. So I think relative to a lot of the other characters, he has a pretty good chance just because he has a moveset that could be very well translated onto the game format. So I think he's got a pretty good chance. The only reason why I don't put him on highly likely is just because his show doesn't have much discussion with it nowadays, unless it's hey, you remember El Tigre? But I think that he is likely just because they are bringing shows that really no one talks about anymore, like Real Monsters, which no one talks about that show anymore, but they still implemented a fighter. So I think seeing someone like El Tigre would be very possible for this game. Next up, Fanboy and Chum Chum. This show, when I was younger, was like, I don't want to say a guilty pleasure, because that makes it sound really weird, but a weird, sick part of me actually enjoyed watching this show sometimes. Like, it was violently stupid. Not violent as in, bloody or gory or anything, but it was just incredibly stupid. But that was what was funny about it. Like, Fanboy and Chum Chum are these two superheroes that you can't really see in the picture, but they wear their underwear outside of their uniforms. That's their whole thing, and they're very weird dudes. Like, they don't have superpowers or anything, but they're just, kids LARPing as superheroes. It was a fairly funny show, depending on your sense of humor, but I don't think they're very likely because it wasn't that popular of a show, didn't run for that long, and I don't think they have much moveset that could translate. But they could do something with the duo fighters mechanic like Ice Climbers do. It could be something, but I just don't think it's going to be one of those duos that we're going to see in the game at all. But next up, we have Jenny XJ9, or My Life as a Teenage Robot. So this one, again, another older one, but it's definitely very popular in the eyes of those who remember it. Because Jenny is a robot who is programmed to do, like, pretty much anything. And she's programmed to fight. So, again, sort of on the same boat of Manny Rivera, where they have moves and they have scenes that could translate very well into a game. But I don't put them as highly likely just because they are a little bit older. And maybe they wouldn't want to go as risky as putting in a character that some of the newer fans aren't going to be too aware of. But they're already doing that with Nigel Thornberry, Real Monsters, so it is very possible, but compared to some of the other characters, I just don't know if they're going to be the highest likelihood they're going to get in, because we don't know how many characters are going to be in this game. Moving on to a character I do think is highly likely to get in, we have Jimmy Neutron. I don't want to say it's confirmed that he's in because we haven't seen anything, but it would actually surprise me if they did not implement Jimmy Neutron into this game. He has so many different things that he could do as a fighter. He could use his gizmos, his gadgets, and all of his science stuff to take down opponents, to debuff enemies, and just do a lot of stuff. He could use the bubble he used from the movie and just like use it as like a rollout, sort of like how Jigglypuff does. You could do a lot of things with his different mechanisms. He could fly with his jetpack for a recovery. There's just a lot. There's infinite possibilities for Jimmy, so he'd probably be the easiest character to translate onto the game. And then next up, Rocket Power. So Rocket Power is an older series, lasted for a little bit, but doesn't necessarily have superheroes or heroes that actually fight or anything. It's just, people doing rocket power stuff. So it's a bunch of skateboarders, bikers, and they're kids, but I think they have a good chance of having a well-translated kit because they could do something sort of like how Bowser Jr. operates in Ultimate, where you can just ride around with your skateboard and your bike, knock away enemies, jump, do kick flips, and throw your skateboard, something like that to make it fun and interesting. And I think, sort of back on the analogy of Bowser Jr., they could make it so every time you switch a skin, you play as a different character. They all play the same, but they just look different for, for visual preference, and if you want to play a certain character, then you can. But they would all play out the same. I just think that they have a lower chance than some just because they aren't actually fighters, and they're iconic, but only to people that are, like, above the age of 19, so sort of a hit or miss. This one is sort of a biased choice, and is a surprising choice, but I'm going to put the X's. So, the X's was inspired heavily by The Incredibles and James Bond, a lot of the spy stuff, and it's a family of spies who go out and they do spy stuff. It's pretty self-explanatory. But as you can tell, even by the just the art, it's heavily inspired by The Incredibles, and even some of the character designs are very reminiscent of the art design you see in like the intro and ending credits of The Incredibles, where it's like that art design where it's very sharp, angular lines. That's what the characters look like. So I put them as neutral as opposed to not very likely, because even though the show ran for one season, I think they could translate very well. And if they're going to bring in a series like Real Monsters, then it's possible they could bring in someone like the X's as sort of a, hey, you're probably not going to know who these people are, much like Powdered Toast Man, but they're going to be fun to fight as, and it could bring people to, watch the show. So this one's a little bit biased. More likely, it's very unlikely, but I'm still holding out hope that they're going to bring in this, because that would blow my mind. Another highly likely is Timmy Turner, or somebody from the Fairly OddParents universe. I think Timmy Turner is the most likely to get in from the universe, and then of course the next would be Crimson Chin. Because he has Cosmo and Wanda. There's so many things he could do. He could have a counter to where it's like, oh, I wish I didn't get hit, and then they get hit. Something like that. He'll probably have a lot of nutty wish mechanics. Probably a teleport, maybe sort of thing. I don't know. But he would have a lot, similar to Jimmy, where he would have a lot of things that they could easily translate into moves. He doesn't really have gizmos and gadgets like Jimmy does, but he does have Cosmo and Wanda that could act as sort of a buffer. and sort of an annoying hindrance to enemy players. And last, we have Tough Puppy. So this was also another show, kind of weird. Ran for a little bit, but didn't really take off all that much in popularity. However, the only reason why I'm putting it at not very likely, or the only reason I'm not putting it at very unlikely, is because they do have moves that could translate very well. It's a show about like this organization of spies that goes down and does spy stuff, basically. You know, the main character, I think his name's Duke. You know, he could do stuff, he could fight, he could be the staple character. They could also implement Kitty Catswell, I think that's what her name is. I don't know, she's a cat, so she's very much the chic archetype character, where she could be just very quick, deal little damage, but rack up a lot of combos and a lot of hits, because that's sort of how she was in the series. She was very quick, very nimble, very agile, so she could translate pretty well. But I don't think that it has that sort of nostalgia prestige that some of the other shows do, because there's a weird space that exists with canceled shows, where it's like, if it ended 15 years ago, people are going to look back on it with nostalgia, and they're going to remember fondly of it. But Tough Puppy only ended probably about 7-ish years ago, so it hasn't quite hit that nostalgia spot where people cared about it enough to make sense as an inclusion. But it still possibly could, just because of the characters and the overall theme of the show revolving a lot around action. So that's my tier list of likeliness for specific Nickelodeon characters to appear in Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl. What do you guys think of the list? Let me know down in the comments. Are there any characters that you think are going to get in? Are there any characters that you think aren't going to get in? Or do you think my tier list is just the worst thing that's ever been existed, and Fanboy and Chum Chum should be highly likely? Let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear what you guys think, and have a good rest of your day. Excited for this game to come out.